Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you a gripping tale of secrets, betrayal, and resilience. What would you do if you discovered your mother-in-law, presumed dead, was alive and hiding dangerous secrets? Follow Sarah's journey as she uncovers a web of lies involving her husband, his mysterious visits, and a hidden stash of incriminating evidence that threatens to unravel her entire life. It's a story about finding strength in the face of deception and the courage to fight for the truth. Stay tuned to uncover the twists and turns of this emotional rollercoaster. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more. It had been a long day. One of those days where every little thing seems to pile up until you feel like you're dragging your entire life behind you. My shift at the hospital cafeteria had been endless. My colleague had called in sick, leaving me to handle the mountain of dirty dishes alone. By the time I caught the bus home, my arms felt numb, and my feet ached so much that I could barely stand. I rested my head against the cold window of the bus, staring at the blurred city lights outside. All I could think about was getting home and collapsing into bed. But then I remembered the mess waiting for me. Yesterday had been Jason's anniversary party, and the house was still a disaster. Plates, glasses, and half-empty platters were surely strewn across every surface, a testament to the crowd of guests who had come to celebrate my husband. The thought of it made me groan. Hosting the party had been exhausting enough, cleaning up after it felt like an insurmountable task. And then there was Eleanor, Jason's mother. Eleanor had been there, of course, and she had found every possible opportunity to criticize me. "Sarah, how could you host a party in such a messy apartment?" she had said, shaking her head in disapproval as if the faintest speck of dust on the windowsill was an unforgivable sin. I had spent the entire day cleaning, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed. But to Eleanor, it was never enough. "And this," she had exclaimed, gesturing at the table I had carefully prepared. There were salads, appetizers, fresh fruit, and even a platter of cheese and crackers that I thought looked quite elegant. But Eleanor had barely concealed her disdain. "Jason's anniversary isn't some casual picnic," she'd said, her eyes narrowing. "This is supposed to be special." I had swallowed my frustration, as I always did, reminding myself that it wasn't worth arguing. Eleanor had never liked me, not really, and while I had tried over the years to build a cordial relationship with her, the constant stream of criticisms and condescending remarks made it nearly impossible. To make matters worse, she had gifted Jason the apartment we lived in, a fact she loved to remind me of whenever I dared to speak up. But the worst moment had come when I told her I'd clean up the mess the next day. I had been utterly exhausted by the end of the party and couldn't muster the energy to tackle the dishes immediately. Eleanor had gasped, clutching her pearls like I had committed some unspeakable crime. "A good wife never leaves her work undone," she'd said, her voice dripping with judgment. Jason, as always, had stayed silent. He loved his mother deeply, and while he occasionally told me I was doing a good job, he never stood up to her. I had learned to endure it for his sake. But it wasn't easy. When I finally got off the bus and walked through the front door, the apartment was just as I had imagined, plates stacked high in the sink, crumbs scattered across the dining table, and empty glasses lined up on the counters. I sighed, kicking off my shoes and setting down my bag. I didn't even know where to start. But then something strange caught my attention. As I moved toward the bedroom, I noticed that the large rug in the center of the room wasn't lying the way it normally did. It was slightly crooked, its intricate patterns tilted at an odd angle. I froze, staring at it. It was odd, wasn't it? I always cleaned that rug with Jason's help because it was so heavy. There was no way it could have moved on its own. And no one else had been in the apartment except for Eleanor. I frowned, the exhaustion in my body momentarily replaced by curiosity. Why would Eleanor touch the rug? It didn't make any sense. My heart began to race as an uneasy feeling crept over me. I hesitated for a moment before kneeling down and pulling at the edge of the rug. The sight beneath it made me freeze again. There was a faint outline of something, too small. Shadowy marks that didn't belong there. I pressed down on one of the marks. And to my astonishment, there was a soft click. A section of the floor shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment. "What?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Inside the compartment, I found several objects neatly arranged in a row. They looked like hard drives, sleek, metallic, and utterly out of place in my home. My mind raced with questions. Why would Eleanor hide these here? What was on them? And more importantly, how long had they been in my apartment without my knowledge? It was an unsettling thought. I cleaned the apartment every week, and I had never found this compartment before. But Eleanor had stayed after the party, claiming she was tired and needed to rest in the bedroom. Had she used that time to place these here? And if so, why? I didn't understand. But the nagging sense of unease pushed me to find out. Carefully, I took one of the hard drives and connected it to my laptop. It took me a while to figure out how to access the files. But when I finally did, my jaw dropped. The screen filled with videos, grainy, dark footage of businessmen sitting in what appeared to be private rooms. They spoke in hushed tones about deals, company secrets, and even exchanged cash. Each video was labeled with names and dates. A clear attempt to organize what could only be described as blackmail material. My stomach churned. Was this really Eleanor's doing? How did she even get this footage? And why had she chosen to hide it in our apartment? I kept scrolling through the files, my unease growing with each new video. In one, a man handed over an envelope stuffed with cash, his face pale as he whispered something to the camera. In another, two men discussed insider trading, their voices barely audible over the static. It was all so damning. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. My hands trembled as I shut the laptop. I couldn't process it all. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, the woman who criticized me for the slightest imperfection, was hiding a web of secrets so dark and intricate that it felt like something out of a crime novel. The sound of my phone ringing startled me, and I quickly picked it up. It was Jason. "I'll be home in half an hour," he said. "Can you make something to eat? I'm starving." I tried to steady my voice, hiding the panic bubbling beneath the surface. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile that he couldn't see. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone softening. "You sound off." "No, I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just tired from work." He didn't push further and hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the hidden compartment. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and anger. Eleanor had always been controlling. But this was something else entirely. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, carefully sliding the rug into place. Whatever was going on, I wasn't ready to confront it yet. Not until I had answers. But as I moved through the apartment, cleaning and preparing for Jason's arrival, one thought stayed with me: my life was about to change. And not in a way I was prepared for. I just didn't know how much yet. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, the images from those hard drives flashed in my mind, grainy videos of men exchanging secrets, money, and favors. Eleanor had always been a controlling, sharp-tongued woman. But this was something entirely different. How could she, a seemingly harmless elderly woman, be at the center of something so sinister? Jason came home that evening, completely oblivious to the storm raging in my mind. He wolfed down his dinner, made a few offhanded comments about his day, and went to bed early, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table long after he fell asleep, staring at the hidden compartment beneath the rug. It felt as though it was mocking me, daring me to confront its secrets. I knew I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I could even consider telling Jason. The problem was, the more I thought about it, the more questions flooded my mind. How long had Eleanor been using our apartment to hide these hard drives? Did Jason know about them? And, perhaps most terrifying of all, what would happen if the people in those videos discovered where the footage was hidden? The next morning, I decided to act. After Jason left for work, I locked the apartment door and pulled out the hard drives again. My hands trembled as I connected the next one to my laptop. This time, I focused on reading the file names. Each one was meticulously labeled with dates, locations, and names I didn't recognize but felt sure were important. As I scrolled through the folders, one name stood out, Rice. There were multiple files under that name, each one containing video recordings and scanned documents. I opened the first video, and my heart sank. A man, dressed in an expensive suit, was speaking nervously to someone off camera. He mentioned a large sum of money and whispered something about keeping things quiet. The unease in his voice was unmistakable, and the implications of what he was saying were clear. He was being blackmailed. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my breathing. Eleanor was blackmailing people. Not just anyone, but powerful businessmen, people with money, connections, and, likely, very dangerous tempers. Suddenly, the small criticisms and petty manipulations she used to throw my way felt insignificant. This wasn't just about me anymore. Eleanor was playing a game far bigger than I could have ever imagined. And she had dragged our home into it. The weight of it all hit me like a tidal wave. If anyone discovered that these hard drives were here, we could be in real danger. I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. Telling Jason seemed like the logical first step, but I hesitated. His relationship with his mother was complicated, to say the least. He loved her, trusted her, and I wasn't sure how he would react to me accusing her of blackmail. I decided to leave everything in its place for now. As much as I hated the idea of keeping it a secret, I needed time to think, to plan. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That someone already knew what I had found. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that flickered in the corner of my eye made my heart race. Paranoia set in quickly, and I began to question everything around me. Then, the news came. It was early morning. 2 days later, I was making coffee when Jason walked into the kitchen. His face pale and his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he said, his voice low. "Mom's house, it burned down last night." I froze, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. "What? Is she okay?" "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "We need to go there. Now." We left immediately, driving in tense silence to Eleanor's house on the other side of town. When we arrived, the scene was chaos. Firefighters were still working to put out the last of the flames, and a crowd of neighbors had gathered to watch. The air smelled of smoke and ash, and the sight of the charred remains of the house made my stomach churn. Jason ran ahead, desperate for answers, while I hung back, unsure of what to do. My mind was racing with questions. Could this fire have been an accident? Or was it connected to Eleanor's blackmail scheme? And where was Eleanor? One of the firefighters approached Jason, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw the way Jason's shoulders sagged as the man finished talking. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and grief. "They couldn't find her," he said. She's gone." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Eleanor, gone. It didn't seem real. Despite everything, her criticisms, her manipulations, I had never wanted this. Jason's pain was palpable, and my own feelings were a confusing mess of guilt, sadness, and suspicion. The firefighter's words echoed in my mind. They couldn't find her. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Eleanor was a resourceful woman, always calculating her next move. Was it really possible that she had been caught in the fire? Or had she escaped? Jason drove us home in silence. I tried to comfort him, but he barely responded. When we got back to the apartment, he announced that he was going to work, brushing off my suggestion to take the day off to grieve. His reaction struck me as odd. But I didn't press him. Once he was gone, I sat on the couch, staring at the rug in the bedroom. The hidden compartment felt like a ticking time bomb, and Eleanor's death or disappearance only made things more complicated. I couldn't shake the feeling that the fire had been no accident. Someone had wanted Eleanor out of the picture, and I was terrified that they might come looking for the hard drives next. As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything, a thought struck me: if Eleanor really had faked her death, where would she go? And more importantly, who else might know the truth? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was certain: I couldn't ignore this any longer. Eleanor's secrets were dangerous. And now they were mine to bear. The question was, how long could I keep them hidden? The days following Eleanor's supposed death were strange and tense. Jason became more withdrawn than I'd ever seen him, spending most of his time at work or locked away in the study. He wasn't grieving the way I thought he would. There were no tears, no real displays of emotion. Instead, he seemed distracted, even irritated when I asked if he wanted to talk about his mother. "It's just a lot to process, Sarah," he muttered one evening when I tried to check in on him. He gave me a weak smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let me handle it in my own way." I nodded. But something about his behavior didn't sit right with me. I knew Jason wasn't the type to openly show his emotions. But his indifference was unsettling. It wasn't just the way he avoided talking about Eleanor, it was the way he avoided me, too. He came home late, made vague excuses, and spent more time staring at his phone than he did talking to me. It didn't take long for my mind to wander to the worst possible explanation. Was there someone else? The thought made my stomach churn. I had never doubted Jason's loyalty before, but things had been tense between us for a while, especially after our recent arguments about starting a family. And now, with Eleanor gone, it felt like something between us had shifted, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I decided I needed answers. That same evening, while Jason was in the shower, I took his car keys and went downstairs. I attached a small GPS tracker to the underside of his car, one I had borrowed from a tech-savvy patient at the hospital. It felt wrong to invade his privacy like this, but my gut told me something wasn't right. If he wasn't going to be honest with me, I had no choice but to find the truth on my own. For the first couple of days, the tracker didn't reveal much. Jason's movements seemed ordinary: work, grocery store, home. But on the third day, a new address appeared on the map, one I didn't recognize. It was several miles outside of town, in a quiet, rural area. He stayed there for hours before finally heading home. When I asked him about his day that night, he gave me the same answer he always did: work was fine. Nothing special. He didn't mention the detour. My heart sank. But I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to accuse him of anything until I had more proof. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. As soon as Jason left for work, I called a taxi and set off for the mysterious address. The drive was nerve-wracking. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Was he seeing someone? Was he hiding something? I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I found at that house would change everything. When the taxi pulled up to the address, I felt a chill run down my spine. The house was large and old, with peeling paint and a dark blue fence surrounding the property. It looked abandoned at first glance, but as I got closer, I noticed a small boy playing near the gate. He couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, with bright eyes and a curious expression. "You shouldn't go in there," the boy said suddenly, startling me. He frowned, clutching a small toy car in his hands. "Why not?" I asked, crouching down to his level. "There's an angry lady who lives there," he said, lowering his voice as if it were a secret. "She yells at everyone." My heart raced. An angry lady? Could it be? "Can you tell me what she looks like?" I asked gently. He thought for a moment, his small face scrunched in concentration. "She's really old," he said finally. "And she has white hair." I froze. That description could only mean one thing: Eleanor. I felt a mix of relief and dread wash over me. If Eleanor was alive, it meant the fire had been a ruse, a way for her to disappear. But why? And why was she hiding out here? In the middle of nowhere? The boy tugged at my sleeve, breaking me out of my thoughts. There's a little crack in the fence, he said, pointing toward the corner. You can see inside. I thanked him and cautiously made my way to the spot he had mentioned. Sure enough, there was a small gap in the fence, just big enough to peek through. I crouched down and peered inside, my breath catching in my throat. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the windows of the house were dark. But then, the front door opened, and a figure stepped out. My heart nearly stopped. It was Eleanor. She looked exactly the same as she had the last time I saw her, except now, she seemed thinner, more frail. She glanced around nervously, clutching something in her hand before disappearing back inside. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Eleanor was alive, and she didn't seem to want anyone to know it. Before I could process what to do next, I heard the sound of a car approaching. I ducked behind a tree just as Jason's car pulled up to the house. My stomach dropped. What was he doing here? And why hadn't he told me about it? My questions were answered when I saw the passenger door open. A woman stepped out, a young, attractive woman who immediately reached for Jason's arm. He smiled at her, and they walked toward the house together, completely unaware of my presence. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. It wasn't just Eleanor hiding secrets. Jason was too. And now, I had to face the painful truth: my husband was lying to me. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I couldn't let them see me. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. But as I turned to leave, I couldn't help but glance back at the house one last time. The sight of Jason and the woman disappearing inside, hand in hand, burned into my mind. My life had just been shattered, and I wasn't sure how I was going to pick up the pieces. But one thing was certain: I couldn't trust the man I thought I knew anymore. Not Jason. Not Eleanor. Not anyone. The ride back home from the mysterious house was a blur. My thoughts raced faster than the taxi speeding down the winding roads. Eleanor was alive. Jason had been visiting her. And worse, he wasn't alone. The image of him walking arm in arm with another woman seared into my mind like a brand. Every mile that brought me closer to our apartment only intensified the ache in my chest. I wanted answers. But more than that, I wanted the truth, even if it tore my life apart. By the time I reached the apartment, my legs felt like jelly. I barely had the strength to open the door and step inside. The hidden compartment under the rug loomed in the back of my mind. Eleanor's secrets, Jason's betrayal, it all felt connected somehow. But I couldn't think clearly. My emotions were tangled in a chaotic mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. Jason came home late that night, as he had so many times before. I sat in the living room, waiting, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. When he walked in, his tie loosened and his shirt slightly wrinkled. I couldn't stop the questions from spilling out. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice sharp and unwavering. Jason froze, his hand still on the door handle. He glanced at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "At work," he said casually, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, standing up from the couch. "I know you weren't at work, Jason. I tracked your car. I know about the house." His face drained of color, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw guilt flash across his features. But then he straightened, his expression hardening into something colder. "You tracked my car," he said, his tone laced with disbelief. "What the hell? Sarah, that's an invasion of privacy. Don't you dare turn this around on me." I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. "You've been lying to me for days. I saw you, Jason." I saw you with her. He blinked. Caught off guard. Saw me with who? Don't play dumb, I said, my fists clenching at my sides. The woman you've been sneaking off to see. Who is she? Jason. Is she the reason you've been so distant? Jason sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Sarah. It's not what you think, he said, his voice softer now. Let me explain. Then explain, I shouted, my frustration boiling over. Because right now, all I see is a husband who's been sneaking around behind my back. He hesitated. And for a moment, I thought he wouldn't say anything. But then, he sighed again, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, he said. Yes. I've been going to that house. And yes, I've been meeting someone there. But it's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. It's my mother, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, my mind struggling to process his words. Your mother? I repeated, disbelief flooding my voice. Yes, he said, looking away. She's alive. Sarah. She faked her death. The room seemed to tilt around me, and I had to steady myself against the arm of the couch. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would she do that? And why didn't you tell me? She didn't want anyone to know, Jason said, running a hand through his hair. She said it was for her safety. Something about people coming after her. People she's been trying to avoid. She begged me not to tell anyone, not even you. I stared at him, my mind racing. So, Eleanor's disappearance wasn't an accident. She had orchestrated the fire to disappear, to hide from the consequences of whatever she had been involved in. And Jason had been complicit in her lie. What about the woman? I asked, my voice breaking. The one you were with today? Jason hesitated again, and I felt my stomach twist. She's helping my mom, he said finally. Her name is Claire. She's an old friend of my mother's. Someone she trusts. That's all. That's all? I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. Jason, do you have any idea how this looks? He stepped closer, his expression softening. Sarah, I swear to you, there's nothing going on between me and Claire. I've been trying to protect my mom. That's all. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to drag you into this mess. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust the man I had married. But after everything I had seen, the lies, the secrecy, it was hard to know what was real anymore. And the hard drives? I asked, my voice quieter now. Do you know about them? Jason's eyes widened slightly, and I saw the recognition in his face. You found them? He asked, his tone cautious. Yes, I said, crossing my arms again. They were hidden under the rug in our bedroom. I've seen what's on them. Jason, do you know what your mother's been doing? He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. She told me some of it, he admitted. She said it was a way to make money, to protect herself. I didn't ask for details. Honestly, I didn't want to know. Jason, this isn't just about money, I said, my voice rising again. She's blackmailing people. Powerful people. Do you realize how dangerous this is? If they find out those hard drives are here, we could be in serious trouble. He didn't respond, and his silence spoke volumes. He hadn't thought it through. He had been so focused on protecting Eleanor that he hadn't considered the risk to us. I can't do this anymore, I said finally, my voice breaking. I can't keep living with all these secrets, all these lies. Jason stepped closer, reaching for my hand. Sarah, please, he said. I know I've messed up, but I was trying to do the right thing. I didn't want to lose you. I pulled my hand away, tears streaming down my face. You already have, I whispered. I turned and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. I needed space, time to think. But deep down, I knew that things would never be the same. Jason had chosen to side with Eleanor, to keep me in the dark. And now, I had to decide whether I could forgive him or if it was time to walk away for good. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word Jason had said. Eleanor was alive. She'd faked her death, dragged Jason into her scheme, and left me to drown in the aftermath of her secrets. My husband, the man I thought I could trust, had chosen to protect his mother's lies rather than be honest with me. And yet, despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe him, to believe that his intentions weren't as selfish as they seemed. But then there was the other woman, Claire. The way Jason had held her arm, the comfortable way they had walked together. That image was harder to ignore. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't telling me the whole truth about her. Even if they weren't romantically involved, she was clearly tied to Eleanor's plans. And that made her dangerous. I had to know more. By morning, I had made a decision. If Jason wasn't going to give me the answers I needed, I would find them myself. I called out of work, determined to visit the mysterious house again, this time prepared to confront Eleanor directly. I didn't know what I expected to accomplish, but sitting around and waiting for the truth to fall into my lap wasn't an option anymore. I arrived at the house just after noon, my stomach twisting in knots. The boy from before, Charlie, was playing near the fence again. He looked up when he saw me, his face lighting up with recognition. "Hey, lady," he called out, waving enthusiastically. "You're back." I forced a smile, though my heart felt heavy. "Hi, Charlie. Is the angry lady home?" He nodded solemnly, pointing toward the house. "She's inside. She doesn't like visitors. Though, I'll take my chances," I said, patting him on the head as I made my way to the front gate. The house seemed even more intimidating in the daylight, its peeling paint and overgrown yard giving it an air of abandonment. But the curtains in the windows twitched slightly as I approached, a clear sign that someone was watching. I squared my shoulders and knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. It took a moment, but eventually, the door creaked open, revealing Eleanor. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, but there was still a sharpness to her gaze, a defiance that told me she wasn't going to make this easy. "Sarah," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing." I shot back. "You're supposed to be dead." "Eleanor." She narrowed her eyes, glancing over my shoulder as if to check whether anyone else was watching. Then, without a word, she stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The inside of the house was just as run down as the exterior. Dust covered the furniture, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. Eleanor led me to a small, cluttered living room and gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. "Start talking," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "What the hell is going on?" Eleanor sighed, sinking into a worn armchair. "It's not as simple as you think," she said, rubbing her temples. "I didn't have a choice. Sarah. I had to disappear." "Why?" I demanded. "Because of those hard drives. Because of the blackmail?" Her head snapped up, her eyes widening. "You know about the hard drives?" "Of course I do," I said. "You hid them in my apartment." "Eleanor, did you really think I wouldn't find them?" She hesitated, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. "I was trying to protect you," she said finally. "If they're in your apartment, no one would think to look there. They wouldn't connect them to me." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Protect me? You put my life in danger. Do you have any idea what kind of people you're dealing with? If they find out those hard drives are with me, they won't hesitate to come after Jason and me." Eleanor looked away, her jaw tightening. "I never meant for you to get involved," she said. "But I didn't have a choice. These people, they're ruthless. If they find me, I'm dead." "So you faked your death," I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You let everyone think you were gone, including your own son. And you didn't even have the decency to warn me about the danger you were leaving in my home." Eleanor flinched but didn't respond. For the first time. She looked genuinely vulnerable. Her confident facade crumbling under the weight of her lies. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not yet. What about Jason? I asked. Does he know everything? He knows enough, she said quietly. I told him I was in danger and needed his help. That's why he's been coming here. To bring me supplies and check on me. And Claire? I pressed. Who is she? Eleanor hesitated again, her gaze flickering toward the window. She's a friend, she said carefully. Someone who owes me a favor. A favor? I repeated. What kind of favor? Eleanor didn't answer, and her silence spoke volumes. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. She was still keeping secrets. Still refusing to take responsibility for the chaos she had caused. I can't do this. Eleanor. I said. My voice trembling. I can't keep covering for you. I've already lost trust in Jason because of this. And now I'm risking my own safety just by being here. She stood abruptly, her expression hardening. You think this is easy for me, she snapped. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in fear every day? Knowing that one wrong move could get you killed? Maybe if you hadn't started blackmailing people, you wouldn't be in this mess. I shot back. Her face reddened. And for a moment, I thought she was going to yell. But then she slumped back into her chair, looking defeated. You're right, she said softly. I made mistakes. But I can't undo them now. All I can do is survive. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to walk out and never look back. To leave Eleanor to deal with the mess she had created. But another part of me couldn't shake the fear that if I didn't help her, the consequences would be far worse for all of us. I need to think, I said finally, turning toward the door. But you need to figure out how to fix this, Eleanor. Because I won't let your mistakes destroy my life. I didn't wait for her to respond. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air, my mind racing with everything I had just learned. Eleanor's lies had set everything in motion. But now they were my burden too. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I knew deep down that I couldn't, not yet. The drive back home from Eleanor's house was a quiet battle between anger and fear. I had gone there looking for clarity. But all I found were more questions. Eleanor had faked her death to escape dangerous enemies. Jason had been complicit in the lie. And the hard drives hidden in my home were the key to it all. It felt as though my entire life had been upended in a matter of days. And the weight of it was almost too much to bear. Jason was home when I arrived. Sitting at the dining table with a drink in his hand. He looked up when I entered. His expression unreadable. There was a tension in the air between us that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. But I couldn't hold my silence any longer. I went to see your mother, I said flatly, dropping my bag on the chair. She's alive. Jason's eyes widened. And for a moment, he seemed genuinely surprised. You went to the house? Yes, I replied, my tone sharp. And she told me everything. About the fire, the blackmail, the hard drives, everything you've been keeping from me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Sarah, I wanted to tell you. No, Jason. I interrupted. You don't get to play the I was going to tell you card. You've been lying to me for weeks. Do you have any idea how humiliating it feels to find out the truth this way? I was trying to protect you, he snapped, his voice rising. Do you think this has been easy for me? I didn't ask for any of this. Sarah. My mom came to me, terrified, begging for my help. What was I supposed to do, turn her away? You were supposed to trust me, I said, my voice shaking. We're supposed to be a team, Jason. Instead, you kept me in the dark while dragging me into the middle of this mess. He stood, his jaw tightening as he stared at me. You don't understand what it's like. Sarah. She's my mother. I couldn't just abandon her. And what about me? I demanded. Tears welling up in my eyes. Do I even matter to you anymore? Or am I just collateral damage in this twisted little game you and Eleanor are playing? Jason's face softened, and he took a hesitant step toward me. "Of course you matter," he said quietly. "You're my wife. I love you." Sarah. I wanted to believe him, but the words felt hollow. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like betrayal wrapped in empty promises. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my bag and heading for the door before he could stop me. "I can't do this right now." The cool evening breeze hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside me. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, replaying Jason's words over and over in my mind. He had chosen to protect Eleanor, to lie to me, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. Eventually, I found myself sitting on a park bench, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped below the trees. The world around me felt so peaceful, so normal. And yet my life was anything but. How had things gotten so out of control? A familiar voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Sarah." I turned to see Claire standing a few feet away, her expression cautious. She must have followed me from Eleanor's house, though I had no idea why. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone cold. "I want to help," she said, taking a tentative step closer. "Look, I know how this looks, but I'm not your enemy." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You've been sneaking around with my husband and hiding out with his mother. Forgive me if I find that hard to believe." Claire sighed, crossing her arms. "I'm not sneaking around with Jason. I've been helping Eleanor. Yes, but only because she saved me once. And I owe her. That's all. And I'm just supposed to take your word for it." I shot back. "No," she admitted. "But I can prove it." Her words caught me off guard, and I hesitated. "What do you mean?" Claire glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Then she leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "There's more to this than you realize. Eleanor's enemies, they're not just businessmen. They're part of something much bigger, much more dangerous. If they find out what she's been doing, they won't just go after her. They'll go after anyone connected to her, including you." My blood ran cold at her words. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said simply. "And because I think you can help." "Help?" I repeated, incredulous. "Help with what? I'm not a part of this." "But you are," Claire said firmly. "Eleanor made sure of that when she hid those hard drives in your apartment. Like it or not, you're in this now. And the only way to protect yourself is to get ahead of it." I stared at her, my mind racing. She was right, I was already in too deep. But the thought of getting more involved, of putting myself in even more danger, was terrifying. "What do you want me to do?" I asked finally. Claire's expression was grave. "We need to move the hard drives somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't be found. And we need to figure out a way to get Eleanor out of this mess before it's too late." I hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about Eleanor or Jason anymore. It was about survival. And as much as I hated the idea of helping Eleanor after everything she had done, I knew Claire was right. If I didn't act, I could lose everything. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "But if we're doing this, I want the whole truth. No more secrets." Claire nodded, her expression resolute. "No more secrets." As I followed her back toward the house, a sense of determination settled over me. I didn't trust Eleanor, and I wasn't sure I trusted Claire either. But one thing was clear: if I wanted to protect myself and maybe even save my marriage, I had to take control of the situation. It was time to stop being a victim and start fighting back. In the end, the chaos brought an unexpected clarity. Sarah managed to move the hard drives to safety, ensuring that Eleanor's enemies wouldn't have leverage over her or Jason. Eleanor, faced with no other choice, turned herself in and cooperated with authorities, exposing the dangerous network she had been tangled with for years. Though her actions had hurt many, it seemed her final choice to confess was an attempt to make amends. For Sarah, The journey was one of self-discovery. She found strength she never knew she had. And though her trust in Jason was deeply shaken, they began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy, and it would take time. But both of them knew that healing was possible if they worked together. As for Claire, her role in helping Sarah protect her family was an unexpected turning point. She walked away from the mess, determined to rebuild her own life away from the shadows of Eleanor's past. In the end, the story wasn't about betrayal or secrets, it was about resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to start anew. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more powerful tales of love, growth, and redemption. See you in the next video.